Right, so this is the OpenChain monthly meeting for Europe and Asia, and this is where we catch up on the news and provide a forum for people to ask questions if they wish. During most of the periods of the OpenChain project, this is also where we actively work on editing our specifications and our education material. This month, we're just pending some activities by our board to confirm the new chairs of specification and education. And we've also completed working on proposed updates to the specifications, and that's also awaiting board review. So this month is purely about news and providing a forum for people to ask questions if they wanted. Before running through the slides, I just want to flag that this meeting, as with all Linux Foundation meetings, is under the antitrust policy notice. Because we're not doing any editing, the agenda today is fairly straightforward. An overview of the project news and essentially a small segment about the forthcoming OpenChain Steering Committee meeting adjacent to the board meeting. The project news is extensive, and rather than simply providing activities in the previous month or so, I decided to do a half-year summary of where we've come, where we are, and indicating, of course, where we're going next. We've had a lot of activity in the first half of 2025, conformance announcements, material released, and so on. The biggest news formally was welcoming Amazon to the governing board of the OpenChain project. Of course, Amazon has a significant influence on the supply chain, and their active engagement with us around our standards around future topics like SBOM quality is hugely useful. The governing board is 25 members. That's the cap the board set itself at. Of course, it represents a diverse set of companies across many industry verticals. Jimmy Alberg from Ericsson is the elected chair. Now, we've recently had some interesting announcements around, for example, our security standard, ISO IEC 18974. The most recent was S-Core last week announcing that they had adopted our standard for security assurance. They'd previously adopted our standard for license compliance in February. It's an interesting note, S-Core being part of Samsung Group, that we've seen a lot of adoption in Korea of ISO 18974, and we've seen it across multiple sectors: consumer electronics, finance, telco, consultancy. It's heartening to see that type of adoption, and it's great to have one geography acting as encouragement to others. Of course, we've seen adoption of both of our standards globally. And one thing I wanted to highlight around the license compliance standard was the recent announcement of adoption by OpenANLOS, which is the Alibaba Cloud Operating System. That's notable because we've seen significant uptake of our standards by operating system ecosystems in China. So we've also seen OpenEuler and OpenHarmony. OpenEuler is a user of not just our licensing spec, but also our security spec across the whole swathe of what they do. Now, inside the OpenChain project itself, we've been doing a lot. Our education work group has, for example, updated the policy template that we provide to help people address making open source policies. That's been updated twice in the last couple of months to make it much easier to use. Not only is the policy template itself easier to use, we've also had activity to give examples or reference versions of outcomes readily available for people. So that's nice. We've also updated our capability model. That's the maturity modeling we offer. That is updated essentially to make it more complete and easier to use as well. We've released new explainers to help people company department by company department understand the value of open chain process standards. The telco community has updated their SBOM quality guide, and that's important because in telco and beyond, we've seen uptake of the SBOM quality work, and we've seen significant momentum. For example, we recently presented to CISA in the US government about this work and had lots of questions. You see, at the moment, we have a lot of requirements incoming on SBOM, and we have multiple SBOM formats. But a key question is, how do we do this in practice in the supply chain? What is it that I need from my suppliers to have a quality SBOM? And we've been working on that a lot. Not only have we made the telco SBOM guide, we have an official validator to check if SBOMs meet the requirements of the guide. We have third-party tooling support via ScanOSS, in adding their support in the last month or so. We have a significant case study from ByteDance showing how they're using the guide in a different industry sector. It's a technical case study, so it goes into great detail. And they contributed schemas to make it even easier to use the guide. Lots going on there. Now, on the front end of our website, we've also been making it much easier to find the processes explaining how we do things like spin up study or work groups, build standards, and so on. We've also totally reorganized our reference library and made it a lot easier to find material inside it. Now, forward-looking stuff has been busy too. Our AI work group, chaired by Dave Marr from Qualcomm and Matthew Crawford from ARM, has reached a draft stage in an AI system bill of material compliance guide to help with managing all of this AI in the supply chain. We've also made some progress on explicitly addressing cross-industry work regarding SBOM quality. In other words, building on the telco SBOM guide and thinking about how we can help people explicitly deal with any differences in the industry verticals they inhabit. That's ongoing, and Kubota-san from Sony is chairing that activity. Well, that's it for the news update. A lot happening, as you can see. In particular, continued momentum for our existing standards, work on new guides, and plenty of work to make it easier to engage with our project and our outcomes. Moving on to what's about to happen very soon, the OpenChain Steering Committee is meeting, and formally speaking, that is the governing board of the OpenChain project, which is made up of one voting member each from the Platinum members, plus the chair of the Specification work group. And they will do a formal vote. Chris Wood, who is the chair of the spec work group and the chair-elect for the next term, has shepherded us across a multi-year process for proposed updates to our existing standards. It was a 2-year period of editing, followed by a 6-month public comment period, and then a 3-month freeze period. And on the 25th of this month, the proposals will go to the steering committee for their review and formal decision. Now, these slides, which will be available adjacent to this recording, go into detail of the specific changes proposed by the community. In total, 5 for ISO IEC 5230, and when it comes to ISO IEC 18974, we have 4 suggested changes. These changes are not dramatic. In both cases, perhaps the biggest thing is a suggested change in duration of conformance, that people should double check their conformance is still valid either every 12 or 24 months as opposed to every 18 months. So the steering committee will meet, look at the 5 changes proposed for ISO 5230 and the 4 changes proposed for ISO 18974, and decide if those changes are accepted, and decide, if they're accepted, when they will be included in updated versions of the standards. For example, they might schedule updates for next year, That's a random example, by the way, but it's equally important to accepting changes. Timing and communicating any changes well ahead of time will be very important for market stability. Right. There are open questions to the community and relatively limited time for those questions to be raised due to the meeting happening on the 25th. Though this is not the first time we've informed the community that the meeting is happening. The questions to the community are really, do you have questions around our submission to the steering committee? Do you have any comments to add to the formal submission of the proposed updates to the standards? And do you have any other items you want them to discuss? There's no need to raise those questions in one particular format. The important thing would be to raise them to me ahead of the meeting. In other words, I would put a deadline of the 24th at the latest Pacific Daytime, close of business, to let me know you have questions. Ideally, on one of our calls like this, or on our mailing list, either the specification mailing list or the main mailing list. With that, the meeting formally goes to any other business. And if there is no other business raised, we close the meeting here. This recording will be made available on our website and naturally will be followed by another meeting, as discussed previously, for North America and Europe. That will be scheduled for next Monday, the 23rd of June. It will provide the same opportunity for our colleagues in those time zones. Thank you very much for those who watched this recording, and see you next time.